I'm just going to start this and say, if you want to skip the introduction, then just jump to the timestamp that's going to be on screen. But hopefully you listen to it. This is my first true crime case, and I want to sort of give all the caveats and disclaimers so I can't be hated on. So basically this case is so twisted, so bizarre, and it's been very famous in America, but not so much over in England. I didn't hear about it until sort of doing some research about which should be the best first case. I think this one's just so intricate, so bizarre, so, I don't know, twisted that it kind of had to be the first one. It's quite a long one, so thank you for watching the whole video if you do. Please stick with me. This is my first case. It is a difficult one to cover, but you know, I thought in for a penny, in for a pound, do the whole baptism of fire thing and just go straight in, do the most confusing, obfuscating case I can. And if I could do that, anything afterwards is only going to be a lot more concise and a lot more coherent. If I'm speaking a little bit fast, it's because I'm nervous. You can slow it down using the little thingy below, but hopefully the nerves don't ramble on too much so you can't understand me. But yeah, just bear with me. I will get better as I go along, and hopefully the cases will be a little bit shorter or a little bit more linear going forward. So yeah, thank you so much for sticking with me through this one. Okay, so let's go ahead with the case. If you skipped ahead, welcome back. If you listened to the whole intro, thank you so much. We're just going to get on with it now, okay? So Robert Durst was born in 1943 on April 12th. In Scarsdale, New York. So his parents were Seymour Durst and Bernice Durst, and he was the oldest of 4 children. So there was Robert Durst, Douglas Durst, Tommy Durst, and Wendy Durst. I know that's a lot of Durst, but don't worry, Tommy and Wendy won't really come back into the story going forward. Douglas is mostly relevant, but even still, it's not he's not a massive influence on the whole story, but his name will come up a lot. So just to get a little bit of background about the Durst family, I'm going to introduce one more Durst, who is Joseph Durst, and he is Seymour's father, Robert's grandfather. So Joseph Durst moved from Austria-Hungary to America in 1902. So really quickly, Austria-Hungary is present-day Poland, just to sort of conceptualize that. And he came over with no money, no friends, no contacts, literally just him and the clothes on his back. But he was a talented tailor. So he started using this talent to, you know, generate some sort of income for himself. He was mending dresses here and stitching things there until sooner or later his name was known. He was being passed around and he was making some sort of money. You know, he was comfortable, which is already incredible for him. He moved over here with nothing and he's already sort of making some sort of income. And then it was doing better and better. And soon enough, he was starting to make dresses for people. And this is when he really established himself as a tailor in New York. He was making dresses for more and more people, generating much more of an income to a point where he could afford to not only carry on with this business, but branch out into other businesses. One of the things he branched out into was real estate. And yeah, it's quite a jump from tailor into real estate. I don't see the connection myself, but he knew what he was doing apparently. Before long, he was managing properties, developing properties, juggling those until he got to a point where he was established enough within, obviously, the tailoring industry, but the real estate industry, that he could afford, like, not only wherewithal, not like financially, but with people behind him, with the public trust, to start his own company, which was the Durst Organization. So he founded this in 1927, which was a good move for him because even though he was doing well as a tailor, like establishing this business really set him up for the rest of his life. Very quickly, contracts rolling in. He'd obviously worked with a lot of people during his time in real estate, and he had those contracts, he had those contacts, he really knew how to network, and before long, that was his full-time job running this company. So that was set up in 1927. By 1940, it was doing really well for itself. Like, he was very well off. And he invited his son, Seymour Durst, to join the company. So within 13 years of setting the company up, he was already up to a point where he could invite his son to come and work. And obviously, his son reaped a lot of the benefits of this company. Nepotism does work. 3 years later, his first son was born. And that brings us to Robert Durst's birth in 1943 in Scarsdale, New York. In Scarsdale, nowadays, it's known as one of the most influential towns on the East Coast. The general income of families there are around $500,000. This is a beautiful place, and it kind of gives some sort of insight into what wealth Robert grew up in. And Robert's house was stunning. It was like very rustic, very beautiful, very, I guess, authentically wealthy. So Robert's upbringing, there's not much to say except for the fact that he and his brother Douglas share this fierce sibling rivalry. Robert and his brother were constantly at each other's throats. It weren't so much violent, but it was quite toxic and volatile. So this growing up was something that his parents noticed. But again, there's not much to say about that just yet, because one of the big events that I do want to talk about is when Robert was 7 years old, his mother died. So the nature of his mother's death has been across different sources. There's a few different sort of descriptions that you find. So some of them say it was a suicide. Some of them say it was a fatal accident, it was terrible. And some of them just say simply mysterious circumstances. Now, Robert claims that he saw his mother die. He said that his father brought him to a certain window, and from there he could see his mother doing whatever she was doing on the roof, and then he saw her topple and obviously lose her life, which is awful. That story within itself is heartbreaking, because if obviously you were to witness anything like that, it's going to have such a horrible impact on you. A lot of other cases I hope I'll talk about here, you see that there's some sort of run-in with death at a younger age, and people really like to attach this to actions later on. So there's a thing called the hindsight fallacy, where you've got all the facts laid out in front of you, and you can say, okay, well, look, back when he was younger, this happened, and that's a red flag right there. Or later on in his life, he had this run-in with somebody, and that was a obvious warning that he wasn't very mentally stable. I think you've got to be very careful, because, of course, it's important to profile these sorts of things, because they very well may have been reasons why he acted in certain ways growing up, but also there's a lot of serial killers who didn't have that sort of upbringing, and they act on impulse, or they just have something wired slightly different in their brains which allow them to do this sort of stuff without really caring. Either way, there is a correlation with a lot of serial killers who have had some sort of history with death when they were younger, but there's a lot who haven't. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But later in life, I think it's important to note that his brother Douglas said, no, that's not true. Robert did not see our mother die. He states that all the Durst kids were in a different house at the time of the death. They were all together, and he said that Robert was using his mother's death as a way to sort of garner some sympathy with the public, which if is true, that's terrible. Like, you don't want to use your own mother's passing as a way to get the public on your side. Whether he witnessed it or not, that would have had some sort of impact on him, which I'm going to leave that to you, to whether you think it's linked to anything later in his life. I'm going to try and get these facts as objective as possible, but I can't be objective, I've got too many opinions. So just 3 years after his mother's death, Robert and his brother Douglas were put into counselling, but it wasn't because of their mother passing, as if they couldn't get over it. It was for a sibling rivalry. So Robert was just 10 years old already in counselling, and his brother was just under 2 years younger than him. The report that came out from Robert was that he had personality decomposition, schizophrenia, and I think it's important to note, again, this happened much later, but he was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. So again, I don't want to dilute anything or justify anything, but if you can just attach to Robert's personality, apparently it was decomposing, he was schizophrenic, and he had Asperger's syndrome. So let's talk about education for a little while, because I think this is a bit more exposition needed about Robert. During his time at school, he's been described as a bit of a loner. Of course, that's one of the key terms that come up with any of these people, but he was quite to himself. It wasn't said that he was very aggressive, but he used to speak to himself quite a lot, and that's kind of a running theme that happened with Robert throughout his life, and that comes very important later on. He was known to sort of keep to himself. He didn't really have many friends. He'd prefer his own company. He wasn't very outspoken. He wasn't very extroverted. He was just his own little person. But again, I don't want to say that, oh, these are traits that we go, okay, it's clear, because I know a lot of friends. I myself wasn't super sociable in school. I had my little friend group, but I just preferred to keep to that. So obviously, I know people can get a lot more extroverted and a lot more confident when they grow up. They become more comfortable with who they are. They become a lot better at making friends. You know, you can sort of assess dynamics and where you fit in, or if you do fit in at all, and kind of make it work. And it seemed Robert could do this because after sort of the main bulk of obligatory education, he went on to study economics in the University of Lee in Bethlehem. And in here, Robert was a lot more sociable because he joined the varsity lacrosse team and he was the manager of the brown and white paper. So for him to be on any sort of team, I'm not saying that makes him the most sociable person in the world, but you know, if you're a part of a team, he obviously had to speak to people and ask for things or work in unison with a group of other people. So whether he was still a little bit of an oddity within there, I couldn't find. Robert studied until 1965, which is when he graduated with a bachelor's degree. After he completed that course, he decided to enroll onto a doctoral program in University of California, and this he didn't complete. I couldn't find out why he couldn't complete it, but maybe he was old enough to start working with his dad, which had pretty much been planned out. Again, nepotism works. It had been planned out. So a lot of this stuff was more, I don't want to say superfluous, because obviously, even if you belong into a rich family, you've got your own wants, your own wishes, but you kind of got that stability no matter what. And any parent is going to want their child to carry on the company name, just like Seymour did for his own father. So Robert moved back with his family, but it's important to note that during his time in University of California, he met a woman called Susan Berman. She's not going to come up for a while, but just note that name because she's pretty important to the rest of this case. So 2 years after moving back from the University of California, so he moved back in 1969, so 2 years later, in 1971, you could have worked out, you could do simple math, he was going about business, and obviously his family owned their own houses all over the place. They owned houses that they rented out all over the place, like pretty much all over America. There was some sort of Durst house somewhere or other, Durst apartment, Durst whatever. The organisation was pretty strong, pretty influential. During one of his visits to one of these apartments, he met Kathleen McCormick. So Kathleen McCormick has been described as very bright, very beautiful, very caring, very loyal and humble and altruistic. You know, she'll go out of her way to help other people where and when she could. She liked to put other people before her.
When I first met Kathy, we were both in college. She was a lot of fun. She had a lot of spunk. She was lovely. She was beautiful. She was just a delight.
She was a dental hygienist, and she wanted to be, like, her main goal in life was to be a pediatrician. She wanted to work with kids. And I think anybody who works in sort of medical fields already has the utmost respect from you because you dedicate a lot of your life just to even be qualified. But the fact she wanted to do it for children, you know, it just shows this very maternal aspect of her, which I think is quite important for some information that comes on later on. So Kathy left her Long Island home at the age of 19 and she moved to Manhattan. She had a little apartment, which of course was owned by the Durst organisation, which is where she met Robert. But the two hit it off straight away and they were besotted with one another. It's been said, like, as soon as they met each other, they just fit so perfectly. They made each other so happy. They had 10 years between them, but again, that wasn't an issue, that wasn't an obstacle. A lot of times people are, there's a good age gap between people and they make it work, and they did. It wasn't an issue. So they went on 2 dates before Robert said to her, look, I've got a place in Vermont. Why don't you come and live with me up there? And Kathy was like, okay, why not? It wasn't a case of they went on 1 date, next date, and then moved together. They went on 2 official dates, but obviously they were in contact and they saw each other within those dates. And then early next year, they moved to Vermont together. So whilst they were in Vermont, Robert had quit working with his father, and he and Kathy opened up a store called All Good Things, which is a health food store. I'm not sure if he quit working with his father to open this store, in a sense of he wanted to open the store so he quit, or he quit and then subsequently opened up the store as a way to kind of fund him and Kathy, or Kathy and him, while he was, you know, in Vermont. But basically that's what they did. So during their time in Vermont, they were very happy. They had this health food store that they were running between them. They obviously creating their own circle of friends, even though Robert was a bit more to himself. Kathy was a lot more extroverted. They were just creating this little microcosm that belonged to Robert and Kathy, and they seemed to be very happy. But whilst they were away, Robert's father, Seymour, was putting a lot of pressure on Robert, saying, look, come back. We need you in New York. We want you to work with the company. We want you here. We need you here. Robert, soon enough, caved into that pressure. So he met Kathy in 1971. They went on this whirlwind romance, and then they moved to Vermont in 1972. And within a year again, they moved back to New York. And in 1973, on April 12th, they got married. So this is Robert's birthday. They married on his 30th birthday, and Kathy is just 10 years younger. So about the marriage, it was just as good as the relationship was. They fit really well together. They really supported each other. They were just a perfect team.
He was, 29, and she was 19 when they were first introduced to each other, and he was Prince Charming and she was Cinderella.
They had goals, they had aspirations. They didn't really have any obstacle to achieve those. Obviously, they had the immense wealth of the Durst organisation, but for some reason, Robert didn't really want to rely on that. Maybe it was a sort of trying to make a point. He was like, oh, I don't need this wealth to be who I am, even though he had used a lot of the wealth in his past. Some reports say that Robert was quite counterculture, regardless of being like a scion of this incredible real estate company. So during this time, as Robert was working, Kathy went to medical school. She wanted to get her qualifications. She wanted to be a lot more established in herself. But Robert would not offer her the money to pay for any of this, which is fair enough. She's not entitled to it, so it's fair enough. But I mean, if I had that amount of wealth behind me, I would do whatever I could to help anybody out, especially my partner. So looking at people talking about their marriage, apparently Kathy generally did dote on him. Like, everything about him was just so perfect, so wonderful. And a lot of people really genuinely believe that his feelings towards her were just the same, like the feelings were mutual. But as time was going on, cracks started to emerge in the marriage. There's little fissures here and there, which people were like, oh, that's not okay. That's going to happen in a relationship. Like any marriage, any relationship, you meet each other and you're just so taken by them that you cannot see any negativity. But then over time, obviously as the years roll by, you notice little things that aren't as cute as they were at the start, or little things, obviously, if you see them in a bad mood and they're being very grumpy or very short with you, it's like, for fuck's sake, okay. And you give them the little sandwich and then they're happy. That happens. Relationships have these little clashes, have these little tiffs. It's natural. But with Robert and Kathy, it wasn't sort of just the standard thing. He was starting to get a lot more menacing, a lot more negative, a lot more malicious with her. And her friends started saying they could see he was getting a lot more controlling, a lot more demanding, a lot more, just a lot more in charge of Kathy's life. And they were saying it seemed to be the more independent she got, like through her studies and whatnot, the more he was trying to keep her trapped down, to a point where mid-70s, so they've been together for a few years, like married for a few years, but together since 1971, she actually fell pregnant and she was ecstatic about this. Like, of course, I think this is why it's important to note that she wanted to be a paediatrician. She wanted to dedicate her life to working with children. She was going to have her own child, but Robert didn't want that. And he forced Kathy McCormick, or Kathy Durst now, to get an abortion. If that's going to happen, it needs to be obviously a conversation and whatnot, but ultimately it's the woman's body. He shouldn't really be able to force her to do anything like that, but the fact that she did proves that there was some level of fear about Robert, or maybe she thought if she went ahead with it, like ignored his wishes, he might break up with her, or something on those lines, which is heartbreaking. But yeah, she had an abortion, and I think it's from this point on that she wasn't happy in a relationship anymore. So obviously time rolls on. Of course, Robert's still working in the family company. He's very steady, very comfortable, and Kathy is working on her studies, and she graduates in 1978. And then after that, she's like, okay, next step. She enrolled at the Albert Einstein School of Medicine, where she obviously wants to get her qualifications to be a pediatrician, and her dream was to open her own clinic. So obviously the life's going on independently of each other. So she's studying, he's working. But the marriage was getting more and more fractured as time went on. There was a lot more tension. It was falling apart a lot more. And her friends started noticing that all these little sort of red flags coming from Robert were turning into really worrying behaviour. He was getting a lot more forceful with her, a lot more physical with her. So here's a quick video about what happened during a trip to Kathy's mother's house.
Might have been Thanksgiving, where she was sitting on the couch and she wasn't getting up and leaving fast enough for him.
Kathy, what?
He came back in and he reached down and grabbed her by the hair and pretty much yanked her up from the couch.
Which in and of itself is quite harrowing, because not only is he treating her this way, but he's confident enough to do it around her own family. I mean, if I've got a cob on with somebody, I'll make sure that I've got a cob on with just that person. I wouldn't be showing it in front of everybody, or maybe I have in the past, I'm not too sure. But either way, I'd try and keep it to myself as much as possible, because I'd be mortified if my partner's mum saw me flipping out or saw me in a bad mood. Oh, there's reports of him attacking a photographer called Peter Schwartz, who was in their apartment for some gathering, and Robert wanted to get everybody out. He just wanted the house to be evacuated, he wanted everybody gone, and Peter Schwartz was taking too long to leave, so Robert just outright punched him. And a lot of Kathy's friends, they were saying to her, look, we can see you're worried. She was open about the fact that she was worried. She wasn't very happy in the marriage anymore. And they were like, get out, the man is insane. He talks to himself all the time. Something that was noticed from his childhood, something that was noticed from his time in school and university, and something that people like employees at the Durst organisation said about him. They were like, this man's just not altogether there. Obviously, you're happy with him, you got a marriage and whatnot, but just leave him.
I used to say, leave, get out. The guy's crazy, he talks to himself. Leave.
He's being physical with you, he's being controlling of you. You don't need that. Like, you can live by yourself.
She would call me late at night to complain about Bob's violence, to say she was afraid of him. But at the same time she was afraid of him, she thought she could handle him.
So in the 1980s, people were saying, okay, this marriage isn't healthy for you. And Kathy was openly saying to people, look, if anything happens to me, look to Robert. If there's any foul play, expect Robert.
She said to me, Gilberta, promise me if something happens, you'll check it out. I'm afraid of Bobby. And I just said, Kathy, of course.
Ellen, if anything ever happens to me, look to Bob. Bob did it. Don't let him get away with it.
For her to say, I'm in a marriage with this man, if anything happens, it's his fault, it's not me. Already, that's quite intense, and that's quite, you know, if someone said that to me, I'd be like, okay, no, you're going, like, out, come on, we're done. And it wasn't until 1981 that she was speaking to one of her friends. Maybe I'm pronouncing this wrong, I don't think I am. It's Gilberta and Jamie. There's a few different pronunciations I've seen online, but that one seems to be the most consistent. Kathy would confide in Gilberta about the fact that she was at the end of a tether, and she did want to leave this marriage. She wanted a divorce. And Gilberta was like, okay, let's do it. She was all for it. She's like, we'll get you out, we'll get you sorted. So Kathy, over this time, she, obviously Robert had a lot of properties all around the place, and one of these properties were in New York City, which Kathy would go to as a sort of refuge from the marriage when she wasn't happy or when she needed a sort of a breather. She would go to this location just to be in her own zone, in her own mind, without having to deal with Robert as a person. So Kathy said, okay, when I finish my studies at the Albert Einstein School of Medicine, that's when I'll get the divorce. Which makes sense, because in any course, there's a lot of deadlines to contend with. There's a lot of pressure on you. Kathy was known to quite a lot stay over in the school when it was coming up to sort of exams and tests or hand-in dates, because it was so overwhelming, or so the work was so extensive. And keep in mind, this is a time where they couldn't just get all the information online like I did for this video. They have to literally go to libraries and do the research properly, read all these papers. She didn't want to add the stress of a divorce on top of that, because for anything like that, there's going to be reams and reams and reams of paperwork which she'd have to work through. She didn't want to juggle this, especially for someone like Robert, who had such a wealthy background. You know, I didn't know there was a prenup, but either way, they're going to have to split their income, split all these things here and there. She just didn't need that pressure. She wanted to finish a course, focus on that. And when she's working towards her dream of being a paediatrician, she could then go, okay, she's doing that within her own time. There's no sort of outside pressures that she can't contend with. So then she could leave Robert. She was like, I can deal with it for now. It's absolutely fine. But the marriage reflected this sort of it was very contentious, and because she was moving away a lot, she was living outside of the joint house a lot, it became pretty much a non-entity anymore. Robert was dating other people. He was dating the sister of Mia Farrow, whose name is Prudence. Got my notes right here. He was dating the sister of Mia Farrow, which shows the sort of circles his family were involved with. And Kathy was like, I'm staying in this apartment as much as I can. I'm focusing on my studies, but obviously they would come back and connect and then go away again. But one important thing to note is that during Robert dating other people, he also had a romantic involvement with his old friend from the doctoral program, Susan Berman. That's not the relevance there. She comes up a lot more later on, but it's just important to note that she was quite important in his life. So let's jump ahead to 1982. By this point, Robert knew that Kathy wanted a divorce. Their marriage was pretty much unsalvageable. They didn't try much to save it. They kind of knew they were on the last leg. So 6 days into 1982, so obviously January 6th, Kathy was admitted into hospital because she was beaten pretty badly. Now, she says it was Robert who did this. Like, she was bruised, she was really, not in a good way. And Robert states, absolute falsehood, that wasn't me, I had nothing to do with this. She's using this as a story to try and get more of my wealth upon the divorce. It's up to you to make up your own mind, but there's a lot of things coming down the line where Robert's got an excuse for all sorts of behaviour. So he said, no, this wasn't me, and he didn't get in much trouble for it. Obviously all Kathy's friends and Kathy's family believed her. Kathy's here with literal bruises all over her face, and Robert saying, no, she's trying to vilify me. She just wants to paint me out of this as this villain. So she's going to get sway in court when it comes to the actual divorce trial. But okay, personally, I think that it was Robert because, let's face it, she's 29 years old, so she's a full-grown woman. She's 9 years into the marriage. She's 4 months off her course, finishing, so she was so close to graduating, and she's suddenly being admitted to hospital. Like, she put up with this for so long. Why all of a sudden would she just be like, oh yeah, it was Robert? She got to the point where she just wasn't, like, he'd literally battered her. Of course she's like, no, I'm done with her. The divorce is kind of in sway. She had the lawyer and stuff in place. She, like, the proceedings were going to start sooner or later anyway. She's like, I don't care. No, it was Robert. But he's like, no, it wasn't me. Kathy called her friend Gilberta and she was saying, look, I'm at the end of my tether, please, I need to get out of this house. Robert and I are literally at each other's throat. I do not want to be here anymore. And Gilberta was like, yeah, come over. We'll have a little party, we'll have some drinks, we'll have some food, it'll be absolutely fine. Come on over, we'll have the best time. So Kathy was like, okay, absolutely. This was like a 45-minute drive. They lived quite a distance from each other, and she went over there, she got there quite early, they were having a few drinks. Apparently Kathy got quite drunk. Not wasted, but she got, she enjoyed her drink. She's probably like, you know what, I'm literally having so much to contend with, so much to deal with. I just want to be out of this house. I just want to have some fun and let my hair down a little. And Gilberta said, while she was here, Robert was constantly calling her. He was like, where are you? What's going on? Why are you there? Blah, blah, blah. So at 7 p.m, Kathy's speaking to Robert over the phone and obviously having this heated discussion. And by 7:15, Kathy was getting ready to leave. So she says to Gilberta, look, let's meet tomorrow downtown New York. Let's have some dinner. Let's just meet up. Like, I just don't want to be in the house. And Gilberta's like, yeah, of course, not a problem at all. And Kathy says before she leaves, if anything happens to me, you will check what you will look after me. Like, you will look for me, won't you? And Gilberta's like, of course I will. Like, don't be silly. Like, you're my best friend. Of course that's going to happen. Now, keep in mind, it was quite a distance for Kathy to get home. So it wasn't just a case of her, popping around the corner to go back to Robert. He was saying, come back home for this distance. And it was, like, that night, it was quite a snowstorm. So he's forcing his wife to get up from this party where she's with her friends to come back to the house during a snowstorm. I mean, let her stay. So obviously that sounds suspicious. She's said this a lot of times. People have seen this marriage get to a point where she's pretty much abused mentally, physically by him, emotionally. So they are already very vigilant about this man. And yeah, she's like, of course, you're my best friend. If anything happens, I know it's not going to be anything on your behalf, it's going to be something on his behalf. She leaves the house, she goes out into the snowstorm to head home, and that's the last anybody saw of Kathy Durst. On January 31st, Kathy leaves this party, and on the 1st of February, the dean of the Albert Einstein School of Medicine gets a call from a female saying that it's Kathy. She's saying, I'm too ill to come in today, I can't come in. The dean's like, okay, not a problem, it's fine, no worries. And obviously she didn't show up any time that week. And Gilberta, who is obviously supposed to be having food with Kathy that day in downtown New York, she's like, well, where's Kathy? Obviously this isn't a time where you can just text and be like, hey, where are you? I'm just on my way or whatever. Gilberta thought maybe it's just a case of she hasn't shown up, but that was very unlike Kathy to let you know in advance. Like if she said she was going to be somewhere, she would be there, and if she had to cancel or she had to rain check, she would let you know in advance, so you would obviously make the whole trip and be sitting there for no reason. And for the next few days, it wasn't Robert who was frantic looking for his wife, it was Gilberta who was frantic looking for her best friend. But going to Robert, he didn't get in touch with the police until 5 days after Kathy's disappearance. His version of what happened that night was, so she came back, we had a bottle of wine together, we were having a really nice night until we had a bit of an argument, we had a disagreement. It got more and more heated as time went on, and then Kathy, just in a fit of rage, like, I'm going, I just want to leave this apartment. And then, again, going back out into the snowstorm, Robert walked Kathy to the train station. He said that she was wearing a brown suede shoes and a cable knit sweater. And he saw her off on the train as she went to the apartment in New York. And that was it. He hadn't heard from her, and he just assumed that she was either staying in that apartment as is, or she was staying over in the school. So that was his excuse. He hadn't been in touch with her. He hadn't seen much of her, but that was what Kathy did. But her friends were saying, no, that wasn't in Kathy's nature at all. If she was somewhere, she would let you know. Now, the reason the police couldn't really do much about this, because obviously it was suspicious. All the friends were saying, no, she said to us, if anything happens, look to Bob. If anything happens, it's Robert. I'm scared of Robert. I want a divorce. I want to be out of this marriage. They knew how he was with her. But because of that phone call on the 1st of February, where, a female voice called up the dean saying, I'm too sick to be coming in. And a superintendent at the apartment said that he saw Kathy on the following day, on February the 1st. But later on, the superintendent who spotted her did say, oh, I only saw the woman from behind. Maybe it wasn't Kathy. Robert said that he called Kathy on that night to make sure she got back home safe. And the police were like, okay, well, look, we need to look into this. Obviously, going to cross-reference the call log. And Robert got a little bit distant, and he was like, oh no, I called her from a payphone. Like, what? You just called her from a payphone? Why didn't you choose your house phone? He's like, I was taking the dog for a walk, so I just got to the payphone and gave her a call. Keep in mind, that night there was a snowstorm, and the nearest payphone to the house that they were living in, to the house where Robert was a 3-mile walk. So to go on a walk 3 miles anywhere is just effort. To go on a walk with your dog during a snowstorm, to make a phone call there, like, you just wait till you got back home, surely. It was clear that he didn't call Kathy at all. Although there was one call that I'll talk about in a little bit. So when the family were getting in touch with Robert, they were saying, look, have you seen that? What's been going on? Robert's saying, like, oh, we've just been arguing. Not like, it's just the usual. She just wanted to get away. He said that he was in a restaurant and he called Kathy from there. But he told police as well that he'd had drinks with some neighbours. And when the neighbours were questioned, they said, no, we don't think he popped in with us. That didn't happen, which is obviously already suspicious. So already there's 3 different stories that, according to the evidence and according to police investigation, they couldn't be corroborated. So this, to me, already is pretty much an admission of guilt. You can't get a story straight for, like, very simple things. So think what you want with that. Kathy's friends did think it was very suspicious. I think it's very suspicious. And because there was no evidence of a body or any evidence about some sort of force or struggle or anything, the police just had to believe Robert. There was nothing else they could do. So Kathy's family were trying to get in touch with Robert, saying, look, is there any updates? Is there any news? What's happened? And apparently he got very nasty, very unresponsive, very distant, very cold. And to them, they say that he seemed like he didn't really care about it. He was getting bored speaking about this. And Kathy's friends, who were incredible for this whole thing, like, they weren't letting this go. Gilberta went to the train that apparently Kathy got the week before, like the train she got from the house they lived in Salem to go to New York apartment. She got that very same train at the very same time, and she was going through with a picture of Kathy, and she was finding out who was a regular on that train, and she was saying to them, did you see her last week? Did you see her on this train last week? And not one person said yeah. And I know that's not enough within itself, because I mean, me myself, when I'm on a train, my head's straight in my book, or I'm playing a Switch, you know, I'm anywhere else but on that train. I could be sitting next to one of the most notable people in the world and I will not have any idea, because that's my world. This is a time, obviously, there's not as much, you can't just sit on your phone and stuff, but people still wouldn't be sitting on a train that long just looking around at anybody else, especially if they were regulars on that train. They've seen the sights, they're bored of it, they just want to get home or to work. So that turned up nothing. And Gilberta still wasn't satisfied with that, so she went to the house in South Salem. She made sure Robert was out, and she broke in. She broke in that apartment, she broke in the house, which, it's awful, it is awful, you shouldn't do that, but she was not letting this lie. She did not want to let Robert get away with this. She broke into the house and she was snooping around here and there, and she found loads of messages from Kathy, loads of mail for Kathy, unopened, dumped in the bin. It was just let go. Now, if my partner went missing, I would be doing as much as I could to make sure I found him. She was already forgotten in Robert's mind. And you know, if my partner had gone missing and all these letters were coming through, I'd peek. I mean, I'd use an excuse of being like, oh, maybe I was just looking to make sure she didn't have a holiday booked, or there was no sort of lead from these letters that will let me know where she's gone. I'd just be nosy, you know, I just want to know what's going on, like, what's he been, what's he subscribed to, what's he looking at. But either way, you know, I'd want to open the letters. I wouldn't just get the letters and dump them. Like, the very least, they should be opened to be looked at for some sort of information, or just kept aside for in case Kathy returns. But Robert didn't care. He just lashed them all in the bin, or threw them in the bin, disposed of them. So Gilberta already thought that was pretty suspicious, which, again, I agree with Gilberta. Gilberta, honestly, she's incredible. We stand Gilberta. But she went one step further. She was going to Kathy's wardrobe. You know, she was looking for any, like, if Kathy's gone somewhere, she'd of course take some of the stuff. She found in the wardrobe the exact same cable knit sweater and brown suede shoes that Robert had said that she left with that night. So, I mean, the evidence is just piling up against Robert. And the police admitted later that there is circumstantial evidence that proves that Robert had some sort of involvement in this, but they can't do anything without any evidence, which I think is ridiculous, because there's been plenty of cases where there's no actual evidence to link directly victim to suspect. But because the evidence is so strong, like it was in this case, because of the behaviour of the person, they've been convicted anyway. And I think here there's a very strong element of money talks. But either way, her friend Ellen Strauss, she was going through, like within 5 weeks, she was going through the garbage still. And she was finding out that Robert was throwing out Kathy's belongings. Like, not just the letters and whatnot, but like her actual stuff. He was like, not getting rid of it. Robert got in contact with Kathy's family being like, awful, so awful, oh my gosh, like if your partner's gone missing, you're going to want so much, you're going to hope, and if you're religious, you're going to pray that she will come back. You'll hold out onto any hope that your partner is going to come back. But he was already getting rid of all that stuff. He was like, nah, can't be bothered. And he was even going so far as renting out the apartments that Kathy would stay in to other people. So when Kathy's family was coming to get their stuff, they're like, where's the rest of it? And he was like, don't know, like, lash this, lash that, don't care, like, just take it and go. And also, when Kathy's family were picking up all of Kathy's stuff, which is really stupid of Robert, like, if you're going to try and hide something like this, like, be as thorough as possible, especially when the evidence is mounting up the way it was. One of Kathy's family members, Mary Hughes, they found the jewellery that Robert said she'd been wearing on the night she left as well. So not only was the brown suede shoes and the cable knit sweater still like there in the apartment, in the house, So was the jewellery that Robert claimed that she was wearing. So the whole outfit that she apparently left during the snowstorming was still in the house. Sooner or later, the case just kind of went cold. So obviously her friends and family were like, no, there's some foul play here. This is Robert. And it's also important to note that at a certain point, Robert just stopped speaking to people. He stopped speaking to media, stopped speaking to police. Well, obviously he couldn't stop speaking to police directly, but he kind of reduced it as much as he could. And his spokesperson throughout this whole case was Susan Berman. She was the one. If anyone wanted to get in touch with Robert, they'll go through Susan. Any media wanted to have an interview with Robert, they'll go through Susan. So she was quite a hefty figure in this whole case. She was fiercely loyal to Robert to a point where no matter what he was saying, no matter what he was going through, she was his rock. You know, she was the foundation on which he could cling on to and he'd be safe. So even though the case did kind of go cold after this, I think there's just a few things to note before we move on to Robert's future. That phone call I mentioned earlier, there was a phone call, I think it was one on the night of Kathy's disappearance to Susan Berman. So he did make a phone call from the house, just not to Kathy. And later on, there was another phone call to Susan Berman. She had some sort of knowledge of this, but she maintained that Robert was innocent. So this happened in 1982. She went missing. Over the next few years, obviously, Robert was kind of put under a bit of a lens from Kathy's friends and family, and even Robert's own family, just a little bit tentative. They were a little bit reticent with Robert. They didn't, obviously he still worked for the company and stuff, but they were just a bit like, oh, this whole case has brought a lot of negative press on the Durst organisation, on the Durst family, on the Durst reputation and name. So they were a little bit cautious about how much influence Robert had over the company. But Robert just carried on as is. He was doing his own thing. He was staying in the house or whatnot. In 1988, he got into a relationship with someone called Deborah Lee Chariton, who was this very wealthy, very established real estate broker. So he started dating Deborah Lee Chariton in 1988, and then in 1990, he, without any fanfare, without any sort of information or without any explanation, he went and quietly got divorced from Kathy under the grounds of marital abandonment. He said, oh, she's left me. I'm by myself, I want to get this divorce. And just a few months later, it was granted. So Robert was now single again. Like, his marital status was single. He was in a relationship with Deborah. After he got the divorce, he moved into an apartment with Deborah Lee Chariton, which was this beautiful, opulent, super wealthy apartment. And Robert, within 9 months, hated it. He was like, no, this is not me, I don't like it. So I think sort of the next big milestone to mention is that in 1994, the Durst organisation passed to Douglas Durst, Robert's younger brother, and apparently Robert was furious. Technically, he was the heir to the company because he was the next in line. You know how the whole hierarchy works. It's ridiculous. Like, whoever's the most competent should get the role as the director of the company or CEO or whatnot. But no, Robert was like, oh, this is mine. He just assumed it was going to be his, and he was furious that it went to his brother. So much so that he just cut himself off from the family. He was like, no, I am done. Like, I do not want to be into this family. I'm just done. And Robert, after that, kind of just went a bit off the rails, just travelling as a bit of a nomad, a bit as a vagabond, it's been stated in some sources. He was just doing what he wanted. He had the wherewithal to go ahead and do this without having to rely on getting a job. In 1999, the police received an anonymous tip about the whereabouts of Kathy Durst's body. The police got the right to search this house, and apparently the tenants, the people who own the house now, were quite supportive. They were like, yeah, of course, come on. So the house was searched, and the nearby lakes and stuff were searched, but ultimately this turned nothing up. But what it did do was it reopened that case. People started getting questioned again. Kathy's friends were getting questioned, and they were ecstatic that this case was open because their friend had disappeared of her own volition, apparently. So Robert was back under this lens, and he liked attention, but he didn't like attention for this. Like, so that was in 1989. Later in the year 2000, so in August of 2000, Rob's friend Sue Berman wrote to him, and she was like, look, Robert, I'm under a lot of financial strain at the moment. It wasn't a position that she was comfortable with. It's not a position that she's been in before. She was like, can you help me out with some money? And Robert, off the bat, wrote her a check for $25,000. But then the news came that Sue Berman was being questioned by the police. Now, this is a little bit weird because some of Sue's friends are saying that she was admitting to them, she's like, I have some information about this. So she maintained this whole time that Robert was innocent, like there was nothing, he did nothing. But all of a sudden when she met these financial issues, she was saying, I've got information that will blow the lid off this case. And they're like, well, what, you've said to us this whole time that he's innocent, there's nothing wrong. She's like, yeah, but I'm just saying, I know stuff that's really going to, like, Robert's not going to be okay.
Susan had said that she had some information that was going to blow the top off of things. Susan, what do you mean? I just have it and it is going to blow the top off of things. You know, I just said, for God's sakes, please be careful.
But then a lot of other Sue's friends have said that she had a mob-like mentality and she was like, the loyalty within the mob is fierce to a point to death. So they were saying, even if Robert did do something and Sue knew about it, she would not tell anybody. So Sue Berman, she was from an incredibly wealthy family herself.
Susan was a journalist, but her biggest claim to fame was as the daughter of Las Vegas mobster Davy Berman.
Davy Berman was Bugsy Siegel's right-hand man and spent a lot of time in prison for him. And in return, Bugsy Siegel gave Davy Berman the Flamingo Hotel.
She was the Eloise of the Flamingo. Going in, everyone knew her.
She grew up as this mob daughter where she walked into this casino and people adored her, people loved her. Like, she was the sweetheart of everybody there, all the dancers, all the croupiers, to all the, the bartenders. Like, everybody knew Sue Berman and she was adored, and she lived up to this. Like, she wrote many books about being in a mob family. She didn't shy away from it all. She embraced it. After this $25,000 check that Robert wrote to her, when he found out that the police were questioning Sue Berman, he wrote a second check for another $25,000.
She started hitting Bobby up for money, more than usual. At the same time, the cops are calling her up to talk about what she remembered from 20 years ago.
And it looked like she was getting ready to talk. She had scheduled interviews with both the New York Times and the NYPD.
So he just sent his friend $50,000, no question, no stress, just, here you go, that's that. Again, he could afford to do it, so why not? It still sounds strange that he'll send such a substantial amount to the Sue woman for just to help her out. I think it's possible, and again, this is just conjecture, but I think it's possible that the person who gave that anonymous tip was Sue Berman. She knew that, obviously, there's the whole fact that on the day after Kathy's disappearance, a female called up to say, oh, I'm Kathy, I'm too sick to come in today, which was not in Kathy's nature. She had a phone call from Bob on the day of the disappearance and not long afterwards. And when they traced that call, it was from, the second call, it was from an area that was linked to disappearances with the mafia Sue Berman's family was involved with. I think it's a possibility that she fallen on hard times. She knew how to kind of coerce people. She wanted to put the pressure on Robert, but obviously not get him arrested because she wanted to get this money from Robert in some way or another. That's conjecture. I don't know if that's true. I would say it is. Okay, so going forward, this is a bit of a flow of activity, so please keep with me. Basically, so Sue wrote to him in August asking for the money. So from August to the next date that's important, December, he had sent her $50,000 from two separate checks, $25,000 each. On December 11, 2000, Robert and Deborah got married. 9 days after the marriage, Robert flew from New York City to San Francisco, and then he headed south. And at the time, nobody could say where he headed south. Nobody knew where he was going. But then on December 23rd, Robert flies back from San Francisco to New York City. So there's 4 days where he's initially unaccounted for. Nobody knows where he is, what he's done, where he went. The day after Robert returns, on December 23rd, Robert goes back. On December 24th, Sue Berman's neighbours hear her dogs barking. They're going crazy, and they're like, okay, what's going on? These dogs don't do this. So they called the police. They were a little bit suspicious. They called the police, and that day, Sue Berman's body was found on the floor. She'd been shot in the back of the head. This is what people say was execution style, and very in fitting with mobster killing. So the police obviously looking around, looking for all this information, and they're saying that there was no signs of forced entry. A lot of Sue Berman's friends said she would not let that door open for anybody she didn't know. Obviously, she was comfortable with Robert. He was one of her best friends, so it seems like a lot of her friends are saying they think it's Robert who's come in and done this. And also, all of her valuables are left, so none of her jewellery is taken. Nothing is really stolen from the apartment. So this isn't a theft that's turned into a murder. This is, whoever came here and did this did it with the intention of killing Sue Berman and nothing else. So not long after this, the police received a letter, an anonymous letter, that was postmarked from the day before Sue was killed, the day before Susan was killed. So the police in the area got a letter saying to check this address, and here's the letter. Now, that letter will become very important later on. Of course, this is suspicious. This doesn't seem right. This seems very odd that there's these 4 days where Robert's unaccounted for. He's flying towards that direction. And Kathy's friends, they're like, okay, well, do you know what? There's no way this can be escape now. His wife went missing, and his best friend has been shot dead. Like, these are two people linked to Robert who were just gone. Like, that's enough, surely. But it wasn't. People were saying that obviously it could have been a revenge killing from the family. Like, there's all sorts of history where this couldn't be linked directly to Robert because of whatever. So he got off with it. And again, even though the police, again, they said there's every chance that Robert could have had a part in this, they also had the main suspect as Sue Berman's manager, which apparently there was a lot of contention with him as well. So, of course, with these two disappearances and Robert's involvement, or Robert's link to these, obviously both these victims, there's a bit of a media frenzy about Robert, about this case, and about what's going on. You know, the daughter of a mafia boss has been killed. It's linked to a man whose wife disappeared 18 years earlier. There's just a lot of drama around this, and the media going crazy about it. Robert didn't like all this media attention. He didn't like the fact that he was under the lens again. So he decided in, was it 2001? So April 2001, he just upped and moved. So some reports say he fled. Some reports say he moved, just wanted to get away. I guess that's much of a muchness. It wasn't that he was hiding from the police. I think the police knew where he was living. But in general, the public, the press, they had no idea. So he moved to Galveston in Texas. So Galveston is this island city just off the Gulf Coast of Texas. It's supposed to be this beautiful, esoteric, quite contained within itself, quite separate. It was unassuming. So this is the perfect place for Robert to just escape to, because if any mainland press wanted to come to him, they'd literally have to go to Texas, across the water, to this island, and then find him. But whilst he was here, Robert did have a very low-profile life. And I'll get more into that later on, because it's really interesting, intriguing, the manner he went about this. So I'm going to pause that there for a second, because I'm going to talk about another case that happened in Galveston, Texas, just 5 months after Robert moved there. So a father and a son were out fishing on Galveston Bay. It's a beautiful place. They just wanted to have some bonding time, like the dad said. He just wanted to take his son out, just really enjoy the freedom that they had, and they were just fishing there. And his son, who was 13 years old at the time, he was just playing about, doing whatever, and then he saw in the water a torso, just a torso, and he's like screaming. He's like, Dad, look, there's a body here, there's a body. And then, of course, quickly the police were called. And some sources say different things, but apparently the torso and a few bin bags were floating in the water. But other sources say there was the torso by itself in the water and the bin bags dotted around nearby. And a lot of people are saying people who don't know Galveston may assume that if they just throw this off the bay, it's going to get swept away in the water. But that's not how Galveston rapids work. That everything came back.
2 arms, one contained a leg and one contained another leg.
Now, anyone not knowing Galveston, throwing something in the water would think, oh, the water will just take it right out. That's not the case in Galveston. Everything comes up.
That's the great question.
So the investigation begins about whose this torso is. And in these bin bags that are dotted around, they find the limbs that belong to the torso, and a lot of items and information. And they delve into these items and information, and they soon find out that the victim was someone called Morris Black. Okay, so Morris Black was this very old, very quiet, very off-the-radar guy. Like, he didn't leave much of a footprint, there's not much information about him. He was very quiet, he kept himself to himself. But even though they had all this information that linked it to be this man, this Morris Black, they couldn't find a head. There was no head ever found in this whole case at all. So that was clearly done separately. If all these dismembered body parts have washed up on shore or have been dotted about in all these places, the head should be within the vicinity, but it wasn't. That was just gone completely. So they did a lot of investigation into Morris Black and, who would have any sort of reason to kill him. So they looked into his friends, they looked into his neighbours, they looked into, people he'd worked with and stuff. And one name came up who was quite an oddity within the community in that neighbourhood, and that was Dorothy Singer. So the police looked into this Dorothy Singer woman, and they were like, okay, well, let's find out about her, what she done, where she come from, who are her connections. And they found out for her, they spoke to the landlord, and the landlord said, oh yeah, she's a little bit of oddity, I don't really have much to do with her. She was a mute businesswoman who'd, her brother had called up the landlord saying, look, my sister's looking for a place to stay, is there any chance she can stay here? She'll be able to pay rent, blah, blah, blah. He's like, yo, I don't care, as long as she's paying the rent, she can stay, that's all the landlord really cares about. So, of course, Dorothy Singer's brother turned out to be Robert Durst. But so too did Dorothy Singer. That was Robert in drag, which, I'm all for drag. I think it's incredible. But the fact he would go so far to the opposite of what he looked like initially to try and stay under the radar, it's immense. And not only did he just dress as a woman, he did actual drag. So even though he was quiet within that neighbourhood, he was well known in the drag scene as the ugliest drag queen on the island. So I think Darien Lake, he just was he was well known because he was so hideous. And it's weird to think that trying to be so covert to dress as a woman, to remove himself from this Robert Durst who people were looking for, to such an extent where he dressed as a woman, that he actually had a drag community. He had a drag mother who said this about him.
It was blue eyeshadow and some red lipstick, and that was it. I called it a day.
I was very intrigued about makeup.
And he wanted to know what dress to wear, how it conforms and, to your figure, your shape. Do you wear hip pads or butt pads, or what do you use for bosoms? Because he really wanted to pass as a real woman. People would walk up and say, "Hey, Cece, let's get a picture of when he was dressed up as a woman. Take a picture of it." And no, he said, no pictures. Nice dresses. He had the top of the line.
So that proves he didn't just want to dress as a woman to cover. He wanted to pass as a woman. Now, I don't think this has any sort of reflection on sexuality. Not that you can't be straight and be a drag queen, but you know what I mean. The assumptions there, but to the fact that he would go through all this to try and pass as a woman, it's just a lot of effort. Either way, as soon as the police found out this was the Robert Durst who was linked to murder and disappearance, he was brought into questioning, and that night his wife, Deborah Lee Chariton, she posted his $300,000 bail. And Robert was not let go from the case. He was still under investigation, but he didn't have to stay in the prison cell. So when the police from Los Angeles and Westchester learned that they had Robert Durst here, they flew over to try and question him and whatnot. Obviously, it was a separate case, so there's police wanting to talk about Sue Byrne, there's police wanting to talk about Kathy McCormack, and the police in Galveston want to talk about Morris Black, because it was pretty suspicious that all these people linked to Robert Durst had met in ill faith. So obviously that happened in September. They found the body parts in September, and he'd been caught, he'd been interviewed, he'd been questioned and whatnot. And then the first court date was set for October 16th of that year, so just a month after. And obviously Rob had bail, so he didn't have to be held or contained anywhere. But when the court date rolled by, he'd fled. he'd just gone. And this ignited a national manhunt. Like, the FBI were involved. They were all looking for this man. He was all over the news. He was all about, like, people in New York, people in Los Angeles, people in California, people in Vermont. All these links that Robert had in regards to houses or some sort of history. They were all looking for this Robert Durst, and nobody knew where he was. And it looked as if he'd pretty much disappeared. So as this moment's going on, people are getting a lot of information, and then someone from New Orleans calls, and they're like, oh, this is really weird. I've had somebody stay in my apartment before who had a very similar story called Dorothy Winnie, and it turns out that this was, again, Robert Durst, who was posing as another woman in a different part of America. So this is something he'd been doing before, and maybe he had this, like, during those years he just went missing and there's no information about him. Maybe he was testing this out to sort of go under the radar or whatnot. So it's very strange to think that this is something that Robert had been accustomed to. But in November of that same year, so on the 30th of November, just 7 weeks after he went on the run, Robert was apprehended in just a general store, and it's so ridiculous. He wasn't arrested for, it wasn't that he was spotted and like, oh, this is Robert Durst guy, quick, hold him, grab him, call the police or whatnot. He was arrested for petty theft. So he, in the store, stole plasters or band-aids, a newspaper, and a chicken salad sandwich with roasted red peppers on a pumpernickel baguette. I know that's a very specific thing to say, but that's been a lot of reports, so I don't know why that's so significant. But the weird thing about it is, when he was arrested, he had, like, on his person $500 in cash. He could just gone up and paid for it. That would be more, surreptitious if he just, I don't know, had sunglasses on or a hat on and just paid for this and then off he went. But the fact he stole was the reason he got caught. And a lot of these cases as well, it's usually some sort of hiccup, someone's been drunk driving or driving dangerously and they get arrested, and that's when they find out to be, oh, this is the serial killer we've been looking for or whatnot. So obviously, as he's been apprehended and he's in custody, the police do a search on his belongings, on his items and stuff, and he had a rental car, and within that rental car there were 2 guns, $37,000 in cash, which is just, general pocket money for him. He could have that easily. He had a lot of marijuana, so there's quite a running theme with Robert that apparently a lot of people were saying that he smoked a lot of weed. And they also found Morris Black's driver's license. So this seems pretty, like, condemning. He's got Morris Black's driver's license. He's run away after being accused of the murder of Morris Black. Like, again, that is pretty much, like, that's all the links there. But it gets really bizarre. Like, I can't believe this. Something that's a bit more insidious. They found in his possession directions to Gilberta Najami's address. He was trying to head towards Gilberta Najami, like the way the trip worked. Apparently, he was going towards her house. And they also said within those 7 weeks, he actually camped outside his brother Douglas, camped outside his driveway. So obviously there's some sort of intention there. Maybe he didn't want to do it because it would draw attention to himself, but there's something not right about that. So Robert's now been in custody for 2 years, and then the trial began. So during this trial, Robert actually admitted to killing Morris Black. He said, yeah, it was me, but it was self-defense. Robert said, on September 28, 2001, he arrived at his apartment to find his neighbour sitting inside without invitation. So he walked in and just sees Morris Black sitting in his apartment for some reason. And Durst said he had this kind of look on his face that Robert took to mean that Morris Black was angry with Robert. Robert said he feared that Morris Black had taken Robert's pistol from a hiding place, which I think was the oven. And so he's got this suspicion for some reason that Morris Black walked into his apartment, is angry with him, found his gun in the oven. So Robert says to him, where's my gun? And then Morris Black just pulls it out on him. Robert's worried about this old man standing there with a gun. He's going to shoot him, apparently in the face. So he runs to him, and then a scuffle ensues, and they're fighting back and forward, wrestling for control of this gun. He says, as they were wrestling, they both grabbed the barrel of this gun and fell backward towards Morris Black. And even though Robert didn't have his hand on the trigger, it shot and hit Morris Black, and that's what killed him. But remember, the head wasn't found anywhere. During this investigation, they sent a whole team to the bay in order to try and find this head specifically, because obviously that would be what corroborates the story. If they find a gunshot where Robert said it happened, then they can go, okay, you know what, the story is credible in some way or other, and it kind of would help Robert's defence, but the head couldn't be found. To me, that seems intentional. Again, that's conjecture, I'm not supposed to say that, but it does seem intentional. After that happened, Morris is on the floor, the gun went off, and after Robert sat up, he could feel in his hand Robert's blood, and he's like, oh no. So then the trial goes on, and they're saying, okay, well, if that's what happened, what about the dismemberment? So what he said was, what he was going to do was roll Morris's body up and bring it out, but he was like, there's no way I can carry this. And then he said, in his panic, he realised that there's a lot of tools in this apartment. So he got them, dismembered Morris's body, and was going to get rid of the parts that way. Now, okay, I'm going to say, in some way I can understand that, if you know you've done something wrong and you know it's probably going to get you jailed for life and you want to try and get rid of the evidence, you would do what you could, but Robert used different tools, and the judge who was presiding over the case said the way the body was dismembered, meticulously handled, it was really deft, that it wasn't the person's first try. So maybe there was somebody else involved, or maybe Robert Durst had done this before. And then after he dismembered this whole body of his former friend, of his neighbour, whatever, he goes to a hardware store to buy bin bags. So this panic state has lasted from him killing Morris Black to having a coherency to get all these different tools to dismember the body in a very expert, deft way. No panic, very clearly done. And then goes out to purchase bin bags, puts the body parts in, and just gets rid of them at Galveston Bay. That's a long time to be panicking for. So this trial went on and on for until 2003, when obviously they've heard all the story, the defence has put their case forward, the prosecution will put their case forward, the jury had heard it all, and then they go, okay, it's time for the verdict. And here's the verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Robert Durst, not guilty.
Not guilty.
Now, I don't know how that's possible. I don't know how, in other videos, if you Google it, you can see them. In other videos, he literally turns to his lawyers and he's like, did they say not guilty? And they're like, yeah. And they obviously congratulate him, like, don't worry about it. So he's actually admitted this murder. He's admitted to dismembering this body, and he's got away with it. So there's claims that a lot of the jury thought he was guilty, but because there is room for reasonable doubt, which is how you're supposed to judge a case in court, if there's reasonable doubt that it wasn't this person, then the person is innocent. But I think there's more to that. He is from a very wealthy family. He does have connections with a lot of bad people. So maybe there was some sort of browbeating, or maybe there's some threats to the jury. Again, that's complete conjecture. I don't know if that's true or not, so don't quote me, but it's possible that the not guilty verdict wasn't completely of the juror's own volition. But even still, he did have all those other charges of obviously posting bail and fleeing state lines with weapons and whatnot, and obviously the theft, blah, blah, blah. So he got a sentence of 5 years for that, but obviously credit for 2 years served already, so he's only going to serve 3 years. And during those 3 years, he was released on parole. So parole basically is when you get out of jail early, but there's a lot of conditions that you need to adhere to, and if you fail any of those, you go back to jail, and that's it. So his conditions are basically he has to stay local, and if he does want to travel elsewhere, he has to get permission for it, which he broke. He went back to Galveston, where he visited Morris Black's house. And he was also seen in some shopping mall where he bumped into the judge who presided over the case, and she was like, what the fuck are you doing here? Obviously not in those words, she's a judge. But she basically got him sent back to jail, and he had to serve the rest of his sentence. So now we're going to jump ahead 4 years. So these 3 people linked to Robert Durst have either been murdered or been made to disappear. And Robert's actually admitted to one of them, and he's been given a not guilty verdict. And because the case was so big and so it caused quite sensation, there was a filmmaker called Andrew Jarecki who made a film with, it was Ryan Gosling and I think Kirsten Dunst, called All Good Things, which is obviously the name of the health food store that he opened up in Vermont with his wife Kathy McCormick. I've not watched the movie yet because I wanted to basically present this case without any sort of outside influence. I'm just trying to read pure facts and offer my own opinion to it. I know if I watch a movie with Ryan Gosling playing it, he's going to sway my opinion because it's Ryan Gosling. So I'll watch that afterwards with my family or something. But either way, that film is out there if you want to go and look at that. And the film got quite positive feedback. A lot of people were interested in it. It was obviously about such a high-profile case. And one of the fans of the film was Robert Durst himself. Robert loved the movie. He loved the portrayal. He loved how Andrew Jarecki directed the whole thing. He was like, this is fantastic. So much so that he got in touch with Andrew Jarecki and he's like, I would love for us to write together. Maybe let's do some sort of documentary where we talk about my side of the story. And Andrew Jarecki's obviously got this interest in Robert's life, so he was like, absolutely, okay, let's go for it. So the two meet up and they're having all these discussions about, okay, what's it going to be? How are we going to portray this? And they decided in the end it was going to be a 6-episode docuseries about the life and deaths of Robert Durst. And that's what it's called. It's called The Jinx, The Life and Deaths of Robert Durst. So obviously talks are being made, contracts are being signed, all this is going on. And I just think this is so weird because he's gone away with these 3 things. Again, the one thing we know he did, the other 2 we can't really say because there's no evidence, but he got away with these things and all of a sudden he's out of media attention, at least directly, and he puts himself back in it. And I think that's probably because he's said to a group of people in a court, I killed this guy, I just remembered him, I got rid of it, and he's been given a not guilty verdict. It's just ridiculous to think that he would put himself back in that position. And over 5 years, so from 2010 when All Good Things came out, 5 years later, that's when the series The Jinx, The Life and Deaths of Robert Durst was aired on HBO. This series, if you look into it, it basically talks about all Robert's history and his family and his life and blah, 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 the cases. And basically he's saying, I want to tell my side of the story. I want to tell what happened from my point of view. And in this, Susan Berman's stepson hands the filmmakers, he hands them this letter he received from Robert Durst back in, obviously from way back when. And this is the letter that the filmmakers got hold of. Now, remember I said earlier to notice the writing on the other letter? Here they are together. Not only is the writing quite similar, but also the way Beverly is spelled, it's incorrect. It's L-Y, not L-E-Y. So whoever wrote this one, a letter in the police of Susan Berman's body, is supposed to have written this one. And Robert Durst himself said whoever wrote this letter, the initial letter, the anonymous letter for Susan Berman's death, he said earlier on that whoever wrote this letter had to have killed Sue Berman. There's no question about it. But later on, when the letters are brought together, Robert was like, yeah, they look very similar, but I don't think they're the same. They got both examples next to each other. They said to Robert, which one did you write?
Can you tell me which one you didn't write?
No.
You know your own handwriting quite intimately because you use it a lot. The fact that Robert could not differentiate between his actual letter that he sent to Sue Berman and this anonymous note, again, that's quite telling. So with this evidence, obviously the police are like, okay, we want to speak to this guy again. And the day before the last episode of The Jinx was aired, Robert Durst was extradited and he was brought in for the murder of Sue Berman. When the police arrested him, they found, once again, in his car, a gun, more than $40,000 in cash, some fake ID, a latex mask. Like, who has that in the car? There's no sandwiches, so no pumpernickel sandwiches, but still, who has that amount of stuff in there? So obviously Robert's been pulled back in for questioning and there's a lot more evidence against him. And then the final episode of The Jinx airs. And this is where he's questioned about a lot of different stuff. But the most chilling thing on why this case was so popular, why this case was so famous, is because of this clip that happened during that episode.
There it is. You're caught. You're right, of course, but you can't imagine. First, I don't know what's in the house. Disaster. He was right. I was wrong. What the hell did I do? Kill them all. Of course.
He said those words. He said, kill them all, of course. That is not okay. Like, why would you say that? And remember, it's been quite like a common theme that he talks to himself. A lot of people noticed that he had these really sort of like extensive conversations with himself where he'll argue his own points and he'll talk about this. So maybe it is just a case of, like, apparently this was used from both sides of the trial in a sense of people are saying, oh yeah, he just mumbles to himself. He's just talking nonsense to himself. But the people are saying, no, he's admitting this. And the lawyer who got him off from the previous case of Morris Black, obviously over a decade earlier, they were saying, no, this letter handwriting thing, that's just junk science, that's ridiculous. And this video, this is inadmissible, this is wrong. Like, he's been tricked to go in there, he's been speaking out of context, and they've just plastered that on in a certain way to try and make it look as if he's guilty. So just under a year later, in February 2016, he's going to plead guilty for gun charges, but ultimately he's going to plead not guilty for the murder of Sue Berman. So the trial for Sue Berman's murder is still going on to this year. So I think March of 2020 is when it started, but obviously there's a lot of reasons why it can't go ahead, which is awful. I hope you're all staying safe. But he still maintained his innocence. He's still got defense team saying, nope, he's got nothing to do with Kathy's disappearance. He's got nothing to do with Sue's death. A lot of Kathy's friends are like so happy that, like, there's been reports where they were sitting on the edge of the seat when he's being in this court case, and they're like, how is he trying to say he's not guilty of this? Like, as long as he's behind bars, like, this dangerous man, they don't want him anywhere. Well, if he could just serve the remainder of his life in prison, they would say that's some sort of justice. So I am going to keep an eye on this case, and I will post up a follow-up later on when the case is brought to a head. But I just think it's so crazy to think that all this evidence is mounting up against him. It's looking very obvious that he did get rid of his wife, Kathy McCormick. He did kill Susan Berman, especially, so that's what I forgot to say. So with technological advancements, that time when he flew from New York to San Francisco, and then he went down south somewhere but nobody knew where, they found later on through credit card details that Robert's card was used in the area Sue Berman died around the time of her death. So that 4 days unaccounted for, he was around where Sue Berman was. And he also used a dry cleaners on which he put in a comforter from Sue Berman's house into there to get cleaned. And the defense changed the whole thing, saying, oh no, okay, Robert was in the area and he did go to Sue Berman's house, but he saw her dead on the floor, panicked and fled. So that is the end of that case. And of course it's an annoying one because it's not really come to a close yet, but it would have more than likely if obviously COVID didn't put a stopper on anything. But there's just a few things I want to talk about which are quite interesting to the Robert Durst case. So initially, Morris Black, there's been a lot of sort of research into his life, and he was very anti-footprint. There was not much about him, but a lot of information has come to light over the recent years, and where he was also involved in the mafia. He was also very much connected to Sue Berman's family. And people actually think that when Sue Berman was a child, Morris Black looked after her. So he was obviously connected directly to Sue Berman, which would be why Robert moved of all places to Galveston in Texas. Like, he could have gone anywhere. He could have left the country, but he went to Galveston in Texas. So maybe Morris Black had fled there under some charges or whatever, changed name, changed whatever, and he's been living low there. And apparently that is true, that Morris Black did have links with Sue Berman. And also, remember when the judge said that Robert Durst had done this before, that he dismembered a body before? So there are two other disappearances that are linked to Robert Durst. So the first one was in 1997, and there was a 16-year-old Karen Mitchell, and apparently she'd left the Bayshore Mall to walk back to her aunt's house, and nobody heard from her again. So as the police do an investigation into this case, they're looking for all information, like who's the last person who's seen her, like who's been around her, who spoke to her, is there any information? Someone came forward and they said, oh, I saw her with this older man. And the police were like, okay, so they did a composite sketch, and this is what they came up with. Now, if you put that up next to a picture of Robert Durst like this, it looks very obvious that this is the same person. And it's said that not long after this picture came out, Robert Durst changed his style of glasses because that was so similar. So he tried to change his appearance directly. And okay, why would Robert Durst have any interest in this girl? It turns out that her aunt ran a clothes/shoe store for women. And Robert Durst had been there on a couple of occasions, sometimes as a man and other times as a woman. So he was dressed as a woman. He was going to this shop in drag to purchase stuff. So that does directly link him with Karen Mitchell. So even though they got that link to Robert, the whole drag being in the community at that time, which all checks out, there's been no arrest, and it's still a very famous cold case in that area to this day. And another case is the disappearance of Kristen Modafferi. I'm not too sure how to pronounce that, so I'm so sorry I got that name wrong. But she, like Karen, she went missing nearby a place where Robert Durst had an apartment and he was living at that time. And many people say the last place they saw this victim was outside a store, All Good Things. So there's not as much on those disappearances. They're not a sort of directly linked to the whole Robert Durst case, but a lot of people are saying that they think that Robert Durst had a hand in these. Again, feel free to do your research, because any information you get, please send up to me. I've tried to cross-reference a lot of information here and there to make it as coherent as possible, but a lot of the sources contradict each other. A lot of the sources give different dates. So I've tried to get, obviously go with the predominant information I find and compile that together. But if you find any other information, especially about those two girls, or again, apparently a lot of people say that there are other cases that they think Robert Durst is linked to, but there's not as direct information or direct links. But any information about this, please send it over to me, because when I do the video about the close of the case, when he's either trialed as guilty or not guilty, or whatever happens to him, there's no knowing with this man, I would love to put all this information in and make it a bit more extensive than rather just this other case closed. So yeah, that was my first case and this video. It was my first video ever doing anything like this. I know for a fact it's going to be all over the place, so I'm so sorry if you're watching it and you're trying to keep up with this random network of facts and stories and links here and there. The case itself was so intense, and I probably should have picked an easier case to try and make my first initial one, but as I said, I wanted to, if I can do this one, I could do any case whatsoever. So thank you so much for sticking with me. I hope you find it as fascinating as I did. It's really weird talking about these sorts of things, because it is fascinating, it is interesting. It's horrible to say that, because people lost their lives, so you got to be very careful with how you talk about these things. But I think it's important to keep these cases up there. And a lot of other true crime YouTubers, or a lot of people who talk about these stories, half the cases I know about, I wouldn't know about if it wasn't for things just like this. So if there's anything I can do to help, I want to do as much as I can. As I said sort of in my introduction, what I ultimately want to do in my life is I want to be a writer. So please check in the link below. You'll see my current, it's a temporary website at the moment, with all my short stories on. It's got links to my novel, it's got links to sort of who I am, what I do, blah, blah, blah. If you've got some time, I would love you to read over any of those stories. I love writing so much. I kind of, even when I'm not being paid for anything, I put so much of my heart and soul into what I write. As I said in the introduction, I do have a novel out called The Catalyst, which if you want to order that, is fantastic, but feel no pressure. Obviously I want to be able to give you entertainment for free. And sooner or later, a lot of the short stories that are available on my website, I will have somebody reading them out to you. So if you're not much of a reader, but you do like stories, a lot of them are very spooky, very horror based, but I like to sort of keep them bittersweet. So they are horror based, but a lot of them are kind of grounded in reality. No, actually, a lot of them aren't. So, some of them are, some of them aren't. I would love you to read over that. If you liked any of them, please give me some feedback. I'd love to hear any sort of validation, because when you're creating anything, it's very upsetting when it just falls on deaf ears. Again, some of the pieces I've had a lot of feedback from, or some of the pieces kind of just been skipped over. So please read any of it, give me the feedback. I'll put my Twitter and my Instagram links up. They're not anything to do with this YouTube channel specifically, they are my personal ones. Maybe I will make ones linked to this YouTube specifically later on, but at the moment, I just want to do this very chill, very much in my own time. Maybe later on, the videos will become a lot more consistent, or maybe become more few and far between, depends how things go, we don't know. But either way, if you've got time to message me about this case, about other cases that you'd like me to cover, or about feedback from writing, or maybe you've got some sort of fictional writing you'd like me to sort of analyse and have one of my friends or one of my voice acting pals read over, I'd be more than happy to do it. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me on this killer tea spiller, and see you again soon.